Not all who withdraw are lost. Some are being found again. C.S. Lewis, Imagined Reflection. We live in an age that mistakes motion for meaning and sound for truth. The heart of man has grown restless beneath the weight of its own inventions. We have learned to measure worth by visibility, to call distraction knowledge, and to equate noise with life itself. But amid the electric brightness of this restless century, there are those who are quietly walking away. Do not be deceived by their absence. They are not rejecting the world in bitterness, nor retreating into apathy. They are stepping aside to remember what the rest of us have forgotten, that God often hides his greatest work behind stillness, and that holiness begins not in speech, but in silence. This is a meditation on those hidden ones. The souls who awaken, withdraw, are broken, remade, and then sent again into the world gentler, wiser, and radiant with an invisible fire. They are not saints carved in marble, but living witnesses, walking silently among us. They teach, not by argument, but by atmosphere. If you have ever felt the ache of being out of place, if you have sensed that modern life hums too loudly for your soul to hear itself think, then perhaps this reflection will find you. It is not a sermon, but an invitation, a reminder that disappearing may sometimes be the most sacred way to appear. There is a quiet phenomenon unfolding amid the noise of this world. Those who once spoke little now fall completely silent. Those who once stood among the crowd seem to vanish from sight. Yet they are not running away, nor are they despairing. They are simply departing from a world where their souls can no longer breathe. Modern society adores brilliance, bright lights, glowing screens, voices projected everywhere, opinions thrown about like fireworks. But there is another kind of light, the true light, not the kind that dazzles, but the kind that pierces inward. When it appears, every artificial glow fades, and in that moment, the awakened souls begin to withdraw from the illuminated square to rediscover the real sky. I believe they have not disappeared at all, but have been summoned. As the noise of the world grows louder, God still calls to those who can listen with a very small voice. Perhaps you have heard it not in a dream, but in a quiet afternoon when your spirit grew weary of pretending to be cheerful. It is the moment you realize that the world is spinning too fast around a hollow center, and something within you begins to retreat, not out of fear, but because remaining would mean betraying your own soul. We live in a civilization that believes silence is failure, that to exist we must speak, prove, compete. But the awakened know that true life begins where speech ends. When humanity stops shouting, heaven begins to whisper. They no longer desire to win arguments. They long only to hear again the sound of truth, so delicate that only those who step away from the crowd can perceive it. And so they gradually disappear from the dinner tables, from social networks, from endless debates. Where have they gone? Not far. They have only retreated into a space the world cannot intrude upon, a place where the soul can breathe without a mask. Some call them strange, others think them weak, but in truth, they are returning to what the rest of mankind has forgotten. Silence is not emptiness. Silence is the room where God speaks. Those who awaken do not gain new eyes. They simply learn to see with the ones they already have. It is as though a veil, long accepted as part of reality itself, has suddenly been lifted. The scenery remains the same. People hurry to work, markets buzz, laughter echoes through cafes, but everything now feels slightly hollow, as if a play were being performed before an audience that no longer believes in its own story. The spiritually awake begin to see the world as it is, a theater of masks. Every smile, every opinion, every ambition seems choreographed to keep the illusion alive. They realize how much of human conversation is merely noise designed to prevent silence, and how much of human striving is a desperate attempt to escape the discomfort of stillness. And once one has seen this clearly, pretending becomes impossible. It is not cynicism that drives them away, but honesty. You cannot unsee the shadow once light has exposed it. And the light does not flatter. It reveals everything, the hidden fear behind ambition, the loneliness inside pleasure, the insecurity beneath arrogance. The world tells us to chase these illusions because everyone else does, yet once you recognize the mirage, to keep running toward it feels like a betrayal of truth itself. C.S. Lewis once wrote that the soul of man is not made for shadows but for light, and that when it finds the light, it will ache until it lives within it. The spiritually awake know this ache intimately. They walk through the same streets as everyone else, but their eyes have adjusted to a brighter realm. The advertisements, the arguments, the glittering promises of modern life all seem strangely pale under the brilliance of the real. To see truth is to be exiled from illusion. You cannot comfortably belong to both worlds. Like a man who has stepped out of a dark cinema into the daylight, you may try to go back in, but the artificial light now hurts your eyes. So too, with the awakened soul, once the true light has shone upon it, the dim glow of this age can no longer satisfy. And thus begins their departure, not a rejection of the world, but a quiet refusal to live inside its dream. They are not rebels. They are pilgrims who have simply remembered that this land was never their home. To awaken is not merely to see differently. It is to feel differently, to live as though one had been handed a new heart while still dwelling in the same old body. The awakened soul soon discovers that its surroundings no longer fit. The conversations that once stirred interest now sound mechanical. The ambitions that once seemed noble begin to feel faintly absurd. Even the laughter that once delighted now carries a hollow echo, like the sound of joy remembered but no longer lived. At first, the awakened try to remain. They attempt to blend back into the rhythm of ordinary life, to nod and smile at the same illusions, to pretend that they, too, still believe. But every effort feels like wearing a costume that no longer fits. Each time they play along, something sacred inside them winces. For awakening is not a choice that can be undone. It is a summons that cannot be ignored. Withdrawal, then, is not an act of pride but of obedience. It is not hatred for the world, but loyalty to truth, as C.S. Lewis wrote. If you look for truth, you may find comfort in the end. If you look for comfort, you will find neither truth nor comfort, only soft soap and wishful thinking. The awakened have looked for truth, and having found it, they can no longer live among the wishful dreams that once sustained them. To stay would be to betray the very reality they have glimpsed. So they begin to step back quietly, without drama. They decline invitations that used to thrill them. They choose solitude over noise. They would rather sit beneath a grey sky and feel God's breath in the wind than sparkle beneath chandeliers that shine only for show. Some friends misunderstand and call it detachment or melancholy, but in truth it is reverence. Even Christ himself often withdrew from the crowds. Scripture tells us that he went to a solitary place to pray. His retreat was not escape but alignment, not isolation but communion. The awakened follow this same pattern, retreating not because they despise humanity, but because they long to hear again the quiet voice of heaven that is drowned out in the marketplace. They carry within them a fragile flame, faith, clarity, conscience, and they know how easily wind can extinguish it. So they shelter it, not from fear but from wisdom. The world mistakes this for cowardice, yet it is courage of the purest kind. The courage to guard one's inner fire when the storm demands compromise. To withdraw, then, is to honor that flame. It is to recognize that no soul can burn brightly in the gales of pretense forever. The awakened do not run away, they step aside, into the stillness where the truth they found may grow roots, and the voice they heard in secret may one day be heard again, not in the noise of argument, but in the quiet authority of a life transformed. There comes a season when the awakened soul, having stepped away from the noise, begins to feel not peace but pain. The silence it longed for now feels like a vast emptiness. The solitude that once promised freedom now tastes like exile. It is the hour when every certainty dissolves, and the heart whispers, "Have I lost myself?" This too is part of the holy process. For solitude is not the end of awakening, it is its crucible. The soul must be broken open before it can be remade. C.S. Lewis wrote that God whispers to us in our pleasures, speaks in our conscience, but shouts in our pain. It is his megaphone to rouse a deaf world. The divine craftsman is never closer than when he seems most silent. It is in that silence that he works, reshaping what we thought was already whole. The ancients spoke of 3 deserts: the desert of the body, the desert of the mind, and the desert of the soul. The first strips away comfort, the second strips away illusion, and the third strips away identity itself. Only when the soul is naked before its creator can it be clothed again in truth. This is the butterfly's cocoon, dark, airless, and hidden from the eyes of men. Inside it, the form dissolves completely. What once crawled must die before it can fly. It is the seed buried in the ground, breaking apart in order to release life. It is the wilderness of the spirit, where one cries out for water and discovers that thirst itself is the teacher. The world will never understand this stage because it values visibility over transformation. It believes that movement equals progress and that silence means nothing is happening. Yet in the kingdom of God, the opposite is true. The deepest growth happens beneath the soil, in the dark and in stillness. Be still and know that I am God, says the psalmist, Psalm 46:10. It is not an invitation to rest, it is a command to surrender. The stillness is not empty, it is filled with presence. Here, the old self begins to crumble, the false ambitions, the borrowed identities, the endless striving to be seen. What emerges is not new in the sense of invention, but new in the sense of revelation, the soul as it was meant to be. The butterfly does not learn to fly, it remembers that it was made to. So the loneliness, the silence, the aching separation, all of it is grace in disguise. For in this hidden workshop of God, the soul is not being punished, it is being recreated. The world has taught us to fear silence. It fills every pause with noise, every still moment with distraction, as though quiet were a vacuum too dangerous to touch. Yet the truth known to all who have journeyed through the desert of solitude is this: silence is not emptiness, silence is language. It is the first and purest dialect of heaven. C.S. Lewis once wrote that God whispers to us in our pleasures, speaks in our conscience, but shouts in our pain. But what of the moments when he says nothing at all? Many take his silence as absence. In truth, it is intimacy. When words fall away, presence becomes the only vocabulary left. The more we grow in the Spirit, the fewer words God must use to speak to us. Silence becomes his final teaching, the point where instruction turns into union. In this silence, every false echo begins to fade. The applause of the world, the hum of vanity, the anxious beating of one's own ego. What remains is the unbroken note of divine stillness, not cold, not lifeless, but alive with meaning. For heaven speaks differently than men. Its grammar is made of light, and its syntax of peace. The spiritually awake learn to dwell here, as one might dwell in a cathedral built of air. They no longer demand explanations or proof. They have realized that faith begins not when we hear God speaking, but when we stop needing him to explain himself. The noise of the world is like rain on a roof. It convinces us that movement and sound must mean life. But the awakened know better. Beneath the rain there is the sky. Beneath the shouting there is the word. Beneath the storm there is the stillness that holds it all. The noise is temporary. The silence is eternal. Silence is not the absence of communication, but the completion of it. It is the language God used before words existed, the pause between "let there be light" and the first dawn. To rest in that silence is to return to the moment before creation, to the heart of God himself. And so, what the world calls emptiness is, in truth, the fullness of his presence. It is the invisible sanctuary, where faith matures and love deepens, where the clamor of reason gives way to the quiet certainty of trust. The awakened understand that to be silent with God is not to lose connection, but to enter it completely. For in the end, All true prayer ends in silence, not because God stopped speaking, but because, at last, the soul has learned to listen. After the long night of silence and reshaping, the awakened do not remain hidden forever. Renewal is never meant to end in retreat. Every transformation in the hands of God is followed by a calling back into the world, not to resume the old roles, but to carry a new fragrance into familiar air. The butterfly does not stay within the cocoon that saved it. The seed does not remain beneath the soil that sheltered it. Resurrection always moves outward. When the spiritually awake return, they come not as preachers of noise, but as quiet messengers of presence. They do not raise banners or gather crowds. Their words are few, but their very being speaks. The light they carry is not theatrical, it is the kind of light that warms, not blinds. Lewis would have called them the salt of the earth, unseen yet preserving, small yet indispensable. They know now that argument changes nothing. The world does not need more voices shouting truth, it needs more lives embodying it. So they do not return to win debates, but to win souls. Their purpose is not to conquer minds, but to awaken hearts gently, through example, through patience, through love that does not demand applause. When they walk back into society, their steps are slower but surer. They understand the fragility of every spirit, even the most arrogant one. They listen before they speak, and when they do speak, it is as if heaven itself leans closer to listen. Each act, however small, becomes a sermon written not in ink but in grace. People notice something different but cannot quite name it. Some feel peace around them, others feel discomfort, as if confronted by a mirror too honest. That is the quiet power of holiness. It exposes without accusing, it convicts without condemning. The awakened no longer seek platforms. They know that true influence flows not from visibility but from integrity. Like a candle in a vast cathedral, their presence alone alters the atmosphere. Their prayer becomes action, their solitude becomes service. They return, not to belong to the world again, but to redeem small corners of it. Each kind word, each unseen gesture, each moment of mercy, these are their sermons now. For they understand what the unawakened have forgotten, that love is the loudest truth and humility the greatest power. Thus, their return is not a triumphal march, but a sacred mission. They go back into the noise, carrying the silence of God within them, and wherever they stand, that silence speaks louder than thunder. The world says they are gone. Friends lose touch, circles grow quiet, and the chatter of daily life continues as though nothing sacred ever happened. Yet heaven does not lose sight of its own. Those who seem to have vanished from the stage of men are, in truth, being trained behind the curtain of eternity. What the world calls disappearance, heaven calls preparation. C.S. Lewis once wrote that the greatest thing is to be found at one with God, to be, so to speak, a mirror that reflects his light into all things. The spiritually awake have entered that very apprenticeship. They are mirrors in the making, and mirrors cannot be polished in crowds. They must first be hidden, ground, and purified until they can bear the brilliance they are meant to reflect. This is why God hides them. The silence was not punishment, it was rehearsal. The solitude was not rejection, it was consecration. Just as Moses was trained in the wilderness before leading Israel, and David learned the harp in caves before the throne, so the awakened are refined in obscurity before they are revealed in purpose. To human eyes, their absence looks like failure, as if the light has gone out. But the truth is that the light is being concentrated. The candle placed beneath the bowl is not extinguished. It is gathering strength to illuminate more when the covering is lifted. In the mathematics of heaven, hiddenness is multiplication. When they finally re-emerge, they do so quietly, almost unrecognized. Their eyes carry something of eternity, and their words, even a few, have weight. They have learned that the truest authority is not in command, but in compassion. They have died to the need to be seen, and thus, paradoxically, they can now see. The world, with its frantic noise, cannot understand this kind of strength. It measures power by visibility, relevance, applause, but heaven measures by obedience. The awakened no longer seek to be famous in time, they long to be faithful in eternity. And when history reaches its appointed hour, when the clamor of men falls silent and the kingdoms of this world crumble into dust, these quiet ones will stand radiant, not because they have conquered, but because they have endured. They will shine not with borrowed brilliance, but with the light of the one they have learned to resemble. So no, they have not disappeared. They are in the workshop of God, being shaped for an age that has not yet dawned. When that day arrives, the world will remember what it once forgot, that those whom heaven hides, heaven intends to unveil. For, as the letter to the Hebrews says, the world was not worthy of them, yet heaven is. And soon, when the final veil lifts, it is these once forgotten souls, the quiet, the faithful, the unseen, who will be called first by name. O Lord of all quietness, teach us again the wisdom of stillness. When the world shouts for our attention, let our hearts remember that your whisper is stronger than thunder. In our seasons of silence, may we not mistake your absence for distance, but feel instead the nearness that only love can speak. When you hide us from the eyes of men, may we understand that you are shaping us for the light of heaven. Make us content to serve unseen, to love without applause, to walk through noise carrying the hush of your presence. Let our solitude bear fruit, and our silence become a song that only heaven hears. And when the time comes, when the veil lifts and the first dawn of eternity touches our eyes, may we find that we were never forgotten, but rather prepared. Amen.